Hey everybody, and welcome to the CSX Bennett subdivision. I had a few things that I've done over the last couple months that I wanted to just post an update video about. Typically summertime is, there's a lot more travel and things to do outside, so I don't get too much done during the summer, but we are starting to move into that end of summer, fall season, so hopefully I'll be making a little bit more content and having some more progress to talk about in the next 6 months or so. Anyways, there's a few updates in this particular area. The first off is that we finally have the first ground actually in place for the layout that's not going to be completely flat. Eventually nothing, I don't want anything to be flat because in the real world, especially in West Virginia in particular, nothing's really truly 100% flat. So this area starts from kind of the table flat zone where everything's level, and it goes down a total of I think 6 inches or so, kind of through this curvature, and leads you into a river scene that'll be over here. And this whole area though is actually a farm, and this is my wife's area that she's been working on. She did all this different stuff, and I've really enjoyed watching her get the hang of some of these scenery techniques and try different things and watch videos, paint up the 3D figures and all these different things. She's had a diorama that she made that I showed, I believe, previously, with a lot of farm animals and stuff that got her going on it. So she did all this, and we covered up the track there, we protected that, and we used basically just stacking up extruded foam, put some packing materials and stuff like that, packing peanuts, whatever was needed underneath, and then applied plaster cloth over top to get that main structure. And then there's a layer of sculpt and mold on top of that. This still needs probably another layer, just a fine tuning with the sculpt mold, and then it'll get sanded, we'll paint it brown, and then it'll be good to go for eventual scenery. But considering we still have to do all this area, we probably won't be jumping into any, foliage or grass or anything like that anytime soon. So showing an overview again of the whole area. This farm scene leads directly into that river scene, and behind the river scene, what I've now mocked up is some 3D and some 2D mountains. So I really want it to feel like as you transition from a little bit of this flatter area into this 180 degree, almost like a horseshoe curve, I really want you to feel like you've traveled. I mean, this area is probably only 15 feet or less of mainline, but I want to get a sense in this small space that you've traveled a bit of distance, and that the area is a little bit more vast and grand than it actually is. So a couple different techniques that I'm using here. It's a mixture of 3D hills like this one, and this one, with 2D backdrops, this one, and then eventually what I'll continue this way. So the 2D ones will be printouts, and the 3D ones will be made of extruded foam. And I'm going to try to make those removable for a few different reasons that I'll go into. But basically, I'll oscillate between either the painted or printed 2D backdrops, and then these more foreground 3D hills using puffball trees. And I am going to try to put some end scale buildings up here to force the perspective like this is actually quite a bit below that, and this mountain range goes back farther, or this, I guess, hilltop goes back farther than you'd actually expect it to. So again, just trying to play a little bit with the visuals to make it feel like you've traveled farther. Also in this area right here, again, this is all really, really rough mock-ups. Just want to get a sense of the proportions and ratios between everything. But there's going to be a hill that rises maybe an inch or two above where it is right now, but it's going to kind of obscure your view of that main line. And then as you go over here in front of the tracks, there's going to be a drop down and a little bit of a washout with a retaining wall. And then over here, the land will be fairly even with where the base of the tracks are, and there will just be trees in front of it that, again, obscure that view of the main line itself. And then you'll actually be able to, my goal is from a sitting position, you'll be able to see the train rolling by underneath kind of the main mass of those trees, like through the tree trunks. You'll be able to see this. So there'll be a little bit of a different perspective in front of the tracks on each of these. And then once you combine that with the different things going on between 2D and 3D for the backdrops, it should help to create a little bit of depth, a little bit of complexity, and a nice transition to make you feel like you've been in the mountains for longer than you know, 3 steps. So that's the goal here. So this river scene, we are going to put in Envirotex and stuff like that to have water, obviously, and we're going to put a few little trees on a little island here. That's the plan right now. Kind of a river that's just deep enough to, you know, that you could get a kayak through is the goal. So it's not a huge river or anything like that. Trying to think what else here, if there's anything interesting. So I did mock up where the fascia is going to be. I talked about what these little 3 mini scenes would be, kind of from a landscape perspective. And in this area, I decided it would be the most simple to just go with a 180-degree curvature here. And I'll just bring that fascia height up to those 3 levels that I talked about. Initially, I'm probably just going to cut it high so that when I kind of figure out exactly what height I want everything to be at, I can just come in with my jigsaw and cut this masonite that is going to go all the way around nice and smoothly and connect to here and connect to here. I can just cut that top to the level of the surface land for, you know, this high area, this low area, and then this intermediate area. So that's the plan right now for here. I basically just use masking tape, as you can see, 150 pieces of it there. And then just the, you know, the brown protective paper that you can buy from Home Depot, kind of almost like a drop cloth. And I just roughed that in real quick after creating a 2D plan against the backdrop for all of this. So that was kind of my process to getting this done. And I'm pretty happy with it so far. There will be, there is no sky backdrop in this area because I want to be able to view from this angle that whole staging yard that's over there. So there will be kind of a curvature to the top of the hill here. It's going to be pretty thin or skinny from an overview perspective, but just to be tight on space between this curve here and the whole curved yard ladder that I have, I'm not able to really put a backdrop or have a lot of depth there. So I'll play around with that to try to get that to look right. There has been a little bit of progress on the staging yard that I wanted to show you guys. Just a second here. So if you look over here, a high-level overview, you can probably tell that most of the trains are gone from this area, and the bridge that I was scratch building is also removed. And I've went ahead and painted all of the track in a brown color. So I still have yet to go back and put a rust coat on all the rails, but everything has its base brown color. And eventually I'll also do a dry brushing to that. But this is just the first step in the process, and usually the rusting part is pretty tedious, so I'm probably going to take a break from this area and work on, you know, the farm and the mountain scenes a little bit. All right, so I did want to show you guys a couple of things that I've been using. So there's a huge yard ladder, like I mentioned, over here that leads into staging, and I think there's 6 or so switches back there. So to make sure that I didn't get the paint in between those movable points and gum everything up, I just used a business card. So I would tuck that into the, let's just show it right here. I would just tuck that into the area that I didn't want to have painted and, you know, go ahead and airbrush things, flip the switch to the other side, and then do the same thing on the other side. Eventually I may add a tiny bit of paint to those areas just so the track doesn't look new and fresh and shiny there, but for right now, I wanted things to be protected and switch nice and easily. So that's what I use to keep things protected there. Another thing that I used, I don't know if anyone else uses this, but this is the No Ox ID recommended by Ron's Trains and Things. And he actually uses this stuff. It's like a grease on the heads of his rail. Let's see if you can... Yeah, you can kind of see that. It's just a very thin electrical conductive grease, but he puts it on the heads of his rail to prevent micro-arcing and reduce the amount of gunk that you get built up on the heads of the rails. So I've used that before for that purpose, but what I found recently is that it's really helpful if you put just a very, very thin layer on the top of your rails before you paint them and weather them, because eventually when you go to get all of that paint that you don't want off of the rail heads, if you don't have anything to help that come off easier, it's extremely difficult. You got to usually use like alcohol or paint thinner or something like that, and then go along with a rag and just rub your way along. And for an area that's this big, that would take, you know, an absolute crazy amount of time. So what I've been doing is putting that thin layer on the track before I paint anything and weather, and then eventually when I'm ready to remove that, I'll just show you real quick here. It's very, very easy to take off that layer of paint. I can do the whole thing with my fingernails. So big time saver. If anybody else has a different way that they do that and make that paint removal easy, feel free to let me know, but just wanted to share that in case you guys are looking for a way to save some time. You guys know that I also use this Model Tech brand ProTrack power feeders. So I went through and I added probably 4 or 5 additional feeder wires into this yard here, made sure to gap my rail, soldered the rest of the rail joints, and then I had to add in ties to the areas where there was joints between the track to fill those blank areas in. And then anywhere that I use a feeder, I'll use this product here, because basically allows you to get your track gauged at the same location that you're getting a feeder tie, at the same location that you're filling in where there's not a tie. So 3 purposes all in the same space, and I really like this product. So they have a few different versions, some for code 83, some for code 100. I'm using actually code 100 on my layout. In hindsight, I definitely would have gone with code 83 because it looks a bit more realistic, but one of those things that you kind of learn and you'll do for the next layout differently. This is where you can see it. The code 83 ties by Atlas are just much, much thicker than the code 100 ties by Walthers in this area, but I'd like to think that as you kind of zoom out and everything's painted and weathered and the ballast is in, it won't be too big of a visual issue there. So I'm not super worried about it. And then if anyone's curious about the colors that I'm using, I tried to accurately represent, you know, the colors of the ties and debris and dust and everything that get in the ballast in the area of Grafton, West Virginia. So the color that I found that looks the best, and I would say the colors that you pick definitely depend on the lighting in your basement. I try to use, you know, warmer, like I think 4,000 or 3,500 K lights. That's just, you know, the light temperature that I like. But in the lighting in my basement and a lack of natural light because it is in a basement, not upstairs, the color that I've ended up liking is a 50-50 mix of NATO brown and 6K Russian brown. So you can see the product numbers there if anyone's curious. They're both made by Vallejo and they are both the Model Air paints, which are ready to go. So I just, you know, I'll count out the drops, you know, 50-50, or I'll just do, you know, a squirt for 2 seconds of one and a squirt for 2 seconds of the other, mix it up with the end of a paintbrush, and then I just go ahead and spray away. So that's kind of my technique for painting this area. And like I say, the first coat's done. I still got to come back and do the rusting to the rails. And now I'll jump into the next room. All right, so we are back in the furnace room, which has got the majority of this staging yard. I have really not progressed the scenery in this room since my last video. I'm still at the point where I need to go back and add the weeds and the bushes and dry brush the track just to really bring everything together between the flat backdrop and the foreground itself. I also need to go through and paint up a whole bunch of railroad related junk that I have piled up here in the front. I may thin this area out a little bit, but I got a whole bunch of 3D printed and injection molded details that have all been primed, and I just want to make it look like, you know, a lot of the storage areas, you know, in railroad owned property, that they've got years and years of junk just piled up, and it's kind of covered in rust, and excuse me, when they need some of it, they go and grab it, and, you know, a lot of times it just sits there for years. Anyways, the thing I did want to show you guys is just a little bit of an update on the military train I've been working on. So this is by no means done. I'm probably only halfway there, you know, just total project wise, but I do have probably 3/4 of the vehicles that I want and probably 3/4 of the flat cars and equipment that I want. So it is a pretty good mix of injection molded Roco kits from back in the day, as well as 3D printed vehicles that are pretty much pre-made and ready to paint, along with a couple of items from Menards that are actually just the cheap construction equipment that they have that I disassembled and painted, kind of painted up like this, and then they do look pretty accurate for, you know, a piece of military construction equipment, and it's a lot less expensive than, you know, needing to get a very specific 3D printed file, custom printed, and then, you know, worrying about all the defects of that, painting that up, and that can take a little bit of time. So when I can find things that are pre-made for a different purpose and just paint them, I do tend to do that. You know, here's a quick example of a 3D printed one that I purchased, already painted up. Fidelity on the print is pretty good. There are a couple little things that are, you know, janky when you look up close, but when you need a large number of them that are fairly accurate, that's a good way to do it as well. So I'll show real quick. These are some of the other vehicles I've got. So you've got another 3D printed vehicle. This is a striker with the long gun on it. That's, yeah, like I said, 3D printed. And then this is a Roco kit that I customized, you know, added a couple different things to it and built it to look as modern as I could get it. And then I also painted it and removed the barrel so that it would look like it was in transportation mode. So those are a few of the vehicles I use. Get these out of the way here. And then I did want to show you guys the flat cars, because that's another thing that's kind of hard to find, is military, specifically DODX and other flat cars in HO scale. So what I've acquired so far is some Walthers. Let me grab the boxes here. I've got some, let's see, some Walthers 89-foot Greenbrier 110-ton flat cars, which are right here. I've got about 10 of those. So those will be used for usually 3 or 4 pieces of equipment, such as Bradleys at the heaviest, or, you know, trailers like you see over here on the lighter end of things. And then additionally, I'll have some JLTVs, Humvees, stuff like that. That's what usually goes on those. And then what I recently acquired are some of these Spring Mills Depot flat cars. So these are pretty pricey and very difficult to get a hold of, to be honest, but the only retailer that I found that had them had a whole bunch of them. So I'll show you the different versions that I bought. I got 5 total. There's 3 different colors: urethane green, olive green, and cascade green, depending upon the era it was built. And then they're also made in either a Thrall, an FGE, or an Ortner configuration. But they're really nice flat cars. They're nicely weighted. They run well. I don't know if they're worth the, you know, the price that you got to pay and the rarity that they have. But unfortunately, they're the only people who make them, and they do a really good job, so they are quite sought after. But I got a few of those. Those are specifically going to be used for, actually not typically the Bradleys, but typically these heavier types of vehicles, as well as Abrams, will be on the flat cars, and there'll be just 2 of them. Some of the Paladins, like you'll see over here, those would typically run in a pair of the Paladin mobile howitzer itself, as well as its you know, its counterpart, the ammo carrying tracked vehicle. I think it's the M99A2 or something like that, and this is the M109. This one's injection molded. I still have to paint it up to match this one, and this one's 3D printed. But that's what goes on those heavier duty Spring Mills Depot flat cars. And then I've also acquired a couple of these red ones here, which are the older run, not incredibly prototypically accurate, but the older run of Atlas DODX flat cars. Here's the barcode for those. So it's actually a 68-foot DODX flat car. I think they made these like 5 to 10 years ago when they only did 1 run of them. I definitely want to paint the deck and weather it up a little bit, because having a bright red deck is not super realistic, but just one of the little things I'll have to you know, deal with as I tune and prep this military train. And then last but not least, these are, I have I think 5 or 6 of these. These are mainly for hauling equipment. They obviously don't have a solid deck. You can see it's you can see through it. It's not completely solid. Sorry for the shakiness. But those are Walthers mainline, and they are the 60-foot Pullman standard flat car. I think in real life, most of these have been phased out right now, but they have been prototypical for the last, you know, 40 years in military trains. They were on a super sale through Walthers for less than $10 a piece. And typically what you'll see them used for in somewhat modern military trains is just putting a combination of 40 and 20-foot box cars, as well as, or I'm sorry, not box cars, containers, as well as some of the smaller little sideways containers that can fit into the same size slot. Spring Mills Depot makes those. Again, those are hard to get a hold of and they're pretty expensive. So what I've just been doing to save time and money is, I'll take just a $1 cheap used container from a train show, a 20-footer, and I'll just paint it in that military tan. And then I'm planning on just loading these flat cars up with those, because a lot of times, in addition to the construction equipment and all of the military equipment that you're used to seeing, there are a lot of containers that come in a military train. So that's kind of what I've been working on the military train. Again, it's probably only about halfway done and still need to grab quite a few vehicles and start customizing each of them, but just wanted to provide a quick overview of where things stand today. Okay, well, thanks for watching, guys. My cat Whisk says that's time to go. That's all I've done, and I need to get back to work. So thanks for watching, and go ahead and put in the comments if you have any tips or good ideas or suggestions that you might have for resources or products. I'm always trying to learn from you guys just as much as you may be watching some of these update videos. So happy model railroading, and hope everybody has a good rest of their summer until I see you again. Bye.